I have this as not a high point on the second side of the album, but honestly, my note is still better than 95% of all songs ever written.
Welcome to 1001 Album Complaints, the show where lifelong friends, musicians, and generally detail-oriented nerds get together to tell the backstory on the most influential albums of all time, as chronicled in Robert Dimery's book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Now, if you do not know today's album super well or not at all, no worries. We're going to guide you through it with lots of clips while we dive into the backstory of the artist and the album. And along the way, we're going to break these songs down musically. We're going to cite various hot takes, and we're going to offer our own wise musical commentary. And at the end of all that, we are going to vote. It's the truth this time on whether this album is really a must-listen before you die. Now, I must warn you that we came here to learn, but mostly to laugh and to have fun. We are musicians ourselves, you see. We understand how difficult it is to make truly great art, and we come from a place of love and respect for the craft. But we also enjoy nitpicking and complaining, as the title of our show suggests. So, bottom line is, there's no sacred cows here. We won't be treating this artist or this album with any particular reverence. Superfans, you have been warned. Now, my name is Rob. I've been playing, performing, and recording music for 2 decades, and I'm ready to talk about it. Finally, audience, episode 201.
Yeah.
Woo!
Tonight, we will be discussing side 2 of an album about which Rolling Stone, in their review at the time of release, said, side 2 is the soul of the album. It delves deep into a matter close to David's heart. What's it all about to be a rock star? That bittersweet melancholy wells out of the contradictions that Bowie beautifully captures and conjures the picture of a painted harlequin under the spotlight of a deserted theater in the darkest hour of the night.
Yeah.
Damn, I just got the feels, dude. Well done. Whew.
Yeah. Did they hire Robert Christgau for that one?
I was going to say that.
Just kidding, Rolling Stone. You're sometimes pretty good. I'm speaking, of course, about David Bowie's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. This is our part 2, side 2 episode on the album. If you haven't listened to side 1, I recommend it. But we are going to continue things tonight, and let's get right to the music by playing a clip of the closing track on the album. It's called Rock and Roll Suicide. The way we shall be introducing our panel of complainers for the evening with a mean tweet-length review. I'm going to throw it first, change things up, throw it first to Adam.
Hey, everybody, this is Adam. You know, I take my concept album themes like I take my Fast and Furious movies. Obvious, intentional, and in your face. And while this album is none of those things, if you start the Ziggy Stardust album with the opening roar of the MGM Lion at the start of Fast and Furious 9, the song Starman perfectly coincides with legendary actors Tyrese and Ludacris launching themselves into outer space in a car. You're welcome. Nah, I'm just kidding. Tyrese and Ludacris are not legendary.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. Let's pass the mic over to Phil.
When you've already crafted a timeless side 1 to a timeless rock record, why keep trying? Just phone it in from there. Bury the biggest hit late. Just nothing matters anymore.
Okay, let's hear from Tom.
Thank you. This is Tom, and I debated whether or not to do a hilariously offensive accent, and I think you're going to be able to tell which side of the debate I came down on. Hello, Governor. It's David Bowie here. I'm putting together side 2 of me album. We all know how important it is to keep the listener's attention and kick off side 2 with a bang. I have 3 songs that are generation-level instant classic hits, and 3 that are going to age about as well as the Dancing in the Streets music video that I made with Mick Jagger. What's that, you say? Put all the stinkers right up front. I couldn't agree with you more.
Damn.
I think I slipped into Australian halfway.
It's David Bowie by way of Australia.
You moved through a couple of accents. It was pretty great.
You all sound the same to us.
Jesus.
And this is Rob here, and my tweet-length review Kicking off side 2 of Ziggy Stardust is, we got it. You're an alien who likes sex with literally everybody. Stop whining and eat something other than cocaine, you fucking skeleton.
You gotta stay rail thin. That's what the ladies are looking
He
for. Rob.
is remarkably.
It's the look. It's an important look.
Did you see some of the videos on Spotify of the concert? Man, he looks wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't normally do this, but since we're on our 200th episode celebration, we also kicked this one out to our Patreon community, and they wrote some tweet-length reviews of Ziggy Stardust, and I'm going to read a select few here for you tonight. So, Patreon subscriber Ben writes, the greatest achievement of glam's banner year, a tour de force of experimental art rock that boasts an outsized influence on artists to this day. The breakthrough project for a genius who would go on to push musical boundaries and invent new genres. I'm talking, of course, about Roxy Music's self-titled debut. He submitted a second one that I also thought was good. Alternately, contrary to what you may have heard here in the past and what you're likely to hear over the next 90 minutes, it's about half a kilo, 50 jars of red peppers, and 25 gallons of milk away from being Bowie's best.
Oh, man.
Nice callback.
Nice reference to our Station to
Yeah,
Station
good stuff.
episode and the backstory there. Go reference that if you like. I think it was in the 40s of our episode count, and we have 2 more short ones. Patreon subscriber Brian writes, on Ziggy Stardust, David Bowie truly changed music forever by being the first artist to cosplay as Mark Bolan. And then he submitted an exceptionally short tweet-length review as an alternate, Low T-Rex.
Low T-Rex is good.
That
That's
is
good.
brilliant. Holy crap. Oh, my God.
It's like the fewest characters ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one might take the cake character-wise.
Yeah, that is good.
Yeah.
So this episode, in case you don't know, is part of our 200th episode celebration. Congratulations, boys. We've made it somewhere.
Thank you.
Ziggy
Yeah.
Stardust was voted on
20% through
by,
the list. Yes.
by you.
Don't say it like that, man.
God.
We're doing-
Be a
I know,
long
yeah, we
decade.
but we've whittled it down to 670 albums only that you have to listen to. So we're doing the Lord's work here. But what's important about that is because it was a very special episode, we sent it out to you, our Patreon community, to vote. And you voted for Ziggy Stardust, and that is why we're covering that today. And I got to tell you, folks, in 2025, we're leaning into voting for what album and what songs to cover. So now is your chance. Join up for free at Patreon and get in on those votes. Determine what we're going to cover next. Okay. With that out of the way, let's talk through some general impressions of the record. Anything in particular jump out to you about side 2? Anything you haven't said yet that you want to say?
I like Tom's assertion that it starts slow on the second side compared to the first. It ends strong, very strong, but it starts slow, both tempo and with harmonic density.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, ironically, this came out in the vinyl era. This works well in the CD era or the streaming era, where you kind of want to bury the less successful songs and have a great start and a great end. But in an era where even on tape you have a hard stop and you got to flip to side 2, when you start side 2, it's a bit of a drop off from the end of side 1, and it gets amazing at the end. But those first 3 songs are a little, they're just not as successful. And I don't think they're terrible or anything like that, but I was definitely trying to think of that experience, of the vinyl experience, and being like, oh my God, side 1 just ended. It was fucking amazing, even though the It Ain't Easy isn't the best song on the end of side 1. But then, you're essentially like packing 4 straight clunkers together, and before you get to Ziggy Stardust, Suffragette City, and Rock and Roll Suicide, which are generation level amazing songs.
Yeah, I know. I have to agree. The worst songs are definitely smack in the middle. Like you said, the first side ended with what I considered the low point. These songs just all kind of are slow. I'll give a little bit of credit. We're not going to talk about it, to Hang On to Yourself. Based on the live recordings and the movie they made of Ziggy Stardust, the concert film, I think they thought of that as a real banger that worked really well live based on where they placed it in the set and things like that. And it definitely has more energy live and things like that. But I totally agree. But that said, I think something that was occurring to me is, given that it is in the vinyl era, all the songs are short.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the songs are short. They kind of get in and get out, and they know their place. They know when they've expended their energy, was what I was feeling.
Well, I mean, we've got an almost perfect runtime here of 38 minutes and 39 seconds on the whole record. I mean, that's pretty close to ideal LP length, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And despite being short, I think they all have patient confidence about them.
Mm-hmm.
They change when they need to, they end when they need to, they extend when they need to. It feels, that's why I was trying to really compliment I'll call it the arrangement, which comes both from Bowie as the songwriter and as the band in the room. They feel like they have a good sense of when they've run out of runtime for the songs.
Well, and to add to that, a song like Rock and Roll Suicide, which comes in at under 3 minutes, you go on a journey with that song. From the beginning of that song to the end is a complete different feel, presentation, and it doesn't, usually when I say a song feels longer than it is, that's not a compliment. It is a compliment in terms of some of these songs where you're like, man, you're like under 3.5 minutes, but I went on a journey during that 3.5 minutes, and it felt like an experience and not just like a castaway pop song.
And as you alluded to in the Side 1 episode, Tom, and I think it's even more prevalent here, I have to credit the band for a lot of that. I think they keep things interesting. There is not a ton of quarterly dense material happening here. There's some cool little tricks throughout the record, but for the most part, it's in the arrangements. It's in these little rhythmic interplay pieces where they chop up the rhythm. We'll talk about a couple of those ideas, or how the lead guitar follows the vocal and then the bass echoes it with a different riff. And it kind of just keeps your ear melodically entertained throughout simple chord passages.
Yeah. Like, for context here, the Britney Spears song, Hit Me Baby One More Time, which is objectively a good song.
A great song, yeah.
But that is 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And that feels like not a disposable pop song. That feels like a pop song. It doesn't feel like there's heft to it. And you get something like Suffragette City, which is 5 seconds shorter than that. And that song just feels like so much more happens in it.
3:25, yeah.
Yeah. This is part of why I do think Bowie deserves his place in the pantheon of great songwriters, even though his songwriting, it's a little harder to pinpoint what is so great about his songwriting, because I agree he's not the absolute best lyricist. I do think he's a great singer, and it's not about the chordally dense or melodically dense ideas. It has more to do with what's happening in the studio and how he's able to wield that. I thought maybe we could touch briefly before we move on to the background and the rest of the story on the album cover, which I think is one of the more iconic on-location album covers, certainly from the era. It was shot in Soho in London. And what I learned about it that I thought was cool was that they did the shoot in black and white, and then they colored the film afterwards. And that gives it a cool effect.
That's why it looks like that.
And also a little bit of a secret and very early Kanye West reference with the K West there. It's great.
See, he's a time traveler, too. Not only is he an alien, he's a time traveler.
Wait, Bowie or Kanye?
Kanye might have traveled back to the 30s and 40s a little too much lately.
Another topical boosh. All right. I assume people are listening to this 3,000 years from now and they'll have no idea what we're talking about. So. All right, I think we have gabbed quite a bit. We are going to get to the songs on side 2, but first, let's get back into the real run-up to how this record was made. So, when we last left our story, David Jones had transformed into David Bowie, and though he had released a reasonably successful single in Space Oddity, it did not catapult him to rock star status like he really wanted it to. And 2 people had just entered his life that were going to help change that. Tony Visconti, a New York-born bass player and music producer who would soon play in Bowie's backing bands and help co-produce his records, and Angie, a brash American woman who would soon become Bowie's first wife and help push him towards his artistic destiny. And little side note, but you might remember us mentioning Tony Visconti. He also produced the T-Rex record that we covered, and there was a story. David Bowie, around this time, had his first child, whom he named Zoe Bowie. He thought that was really funny. He convinced Mark Bolan to name his son Roland Bolan.
That's pretty funny.
But they were unable to convince Tony Visconti to name his son Monty. That's where he drew that.
Yeah.
So Angie, as we said last week, David Bowie meets her at a party and is instantly attracted to her, in part because she's a loud, confident American, in contrast to the stereotypical British hanging on in quiet desperation approach, but also because, according to many, they more or less look the same. Similar hair color, eye color, body frame.
No way.
Bowie is a narcissist through and through. And they're both stated bisexuals, and Bowie joked that they had dated the same guy in the past, but that may have just been a joke. Unclear.
Dude, they are the same person. That is wild.
Bowie seems like he could be the kind of guy that would call his own name out during sex. It's definitely possible.
Wait, is something wrong with that?
So let's do a quick aside to Bowie's romantic life thus far. He was previously in love with a ballet dancer who broke his heart, and her name was Hermione, which who knew people outside of Harry Potter were actually named that.
Oh, that's why he has a song about her, right?
He did. It's on Space Oddity. And he in part wrote Space Oddity about loneliness and isolation in the wake of that breakup. But after that,
Ballet, so she was 78 pounds as well, right?
he likes slight-framed women because he is skeletally thin. This is actually before cocaine. I don't even know what, imagine what cocaine did to him. So what I'm saying was, according to him and other sources, this is the kind of stuff he did talk about. After that relationship, he swore off love, not sex, not living with a woman or anyone, not marriage. But when he meets Angela, he's actually living with another woman in a sort of hippie, open relationship lifestyle. And to make things even weirder, at one point, Angela moves in with them for a late 60s throuple situation. But anyway, it's relevant because Hermione had been the one that opened him up to a bit more of the theater world. And that gets even deeper after a London stage show picks one of his songs as the soundtrack. He meets the director of that piece as well, who starts showing him all about kabuki theater in Japan and the important artistic work of mimes.
Wow.
But anyway, despite being hip and artsy and meeting all these different London people, Bowie is still fairly dejected musically. He's not sure what to do next at all. He's considering going deeper into a Simon and Garfunkel direction because Bookends has just come out and he totally loves that.
Okay.
And Angela comes in like a freaking tornado and slaps him around and tells him two things. One, you need new management. You need someone young who understands where music is going, someone who can make you a star, baby.
Yeah.
And two, as a little extra motivation, she reminds him, as all great girlfriends do, your old pal Mark Bolan is going to lap you very shortly. And you better embrace the theatrical element of live music.
I like how all these descriptions are like, this just like brassy, tough as nails bitch came through. And it's like, she probably was just like a normal American, and like the reserved Britishness, they were like, what is this crazy person doing? You're like, I don't know, like stating my opinion as a woman. I don't know. That doesn't seem crazy.
So in other news, I thought this was interesting. They had seen Alice Cooper roll through London around this time, and Bowie loved the spectacle of the live show. So he kind of takes that in, right? And he's putting these pieces together. It's going to take him a little bit of time. We'll get to it, right? So first thing he does is he fires his manager, and he hooks up with a younger guy called Tony DeFries. And Angie, for her part, buys a sewing machine and starts sewing costumes for the band that's still touring.
Oh, that's awesome.
Sound familiar, guys? And Tony Visconti's in this band, as well as two guys from Hull called Mick Ronson, who's on Ziggy Stardust, and Woody Woodmansey, the drummer, also on Ziggy Stardust.
That's just his...
I think that must be a nickname. I don't think he was christened Woody Woodmansey, but that's a great name.
I just love the last name of Woodmansey, and it's so one of those things. It probably comes from like 200 years ago. We're like, he's a woodman. Well, he's Woodmansey. You know, he's not. It's not his full time job. He's just a little Woodmansey.
Right.
There's a bit of that about him. So Bowie christens this new band The Hype because he now understands the importance of theatricality on stage. And I should tell you, the initial costume designs are very DIY. There's a theme of camp, and you can see where it's heading, but Bowie is Rainbow Man.
Okay.
Visconti is Gangster Man. Kind of sounds like the Village People, actually.
Gangster.
And the other guys are Cowboy Man and Hype Man, respectively.
Wow.
Think
All right.
goofy superheroes or perhaps chop level costuming here.
Yeah, it's like Beastie Boys minus several points.
To be frank, they all kind of sound like they could be gay man, like, Rainbow
He
Man.
wasn't shy about leaning into the gay aspect of things. And in fact, the old manager that he had ditched was really convinced that he could be this gay cabaret icon. And that was kind of his strategy. And Bowie's like, I want more than that.
I can't imagine why. That sounds like a really top-end career.
I do think that his androgyny allows you to put him in like a separate category from almost all the other stars that were trying to be maybe masculine at the time. And he has a thing that you just, when you think of David Bowie, I don't think of him as a person. I think of him as like an entity in a good way.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Okay, so the first night this band plays, to your points, they get booed and called every manner of homophobic epithet.
Jeez.
Why don't you enumerate some of those, Rob? Put them on tape for us.
But some say glam rock was born then and there. And I should point out that Mark Bolan was at the show watching every move, but later denied that he was ever there.
Oh, okay.
So the Hype, along with Bowie, go in and record The Man Who Sold the World. It's one of his darkest, heaviest efforts, as we alluded to in the first episode. He's dealing with the death of his father, his older brothers falling into paranoid schizophrenia at the time. He's still like 21, to be clear. But unfortunately, there are no hits to be found at the time on that record. And Mercury, his label, is over it, so he gets dropped. Now, luckily, his new manager's been shopping him around and gets him signed to RCA with a 3-album, 2-year deal for a modest $37,000 each. But it is the label of Elvis Presley. They are looking around for a new rock star, and they're ready to promote the hell out of it and make David Bowie happen. So despite not having much money or success yet, the new manager lays out a clear strategy. While you are on tour in the U.S., you must act like a millionaire rock star.
Oh, that's awesome.
That sounds pretty great.
And I'm sure he was totally up for it and willing and able to fit that.
It definitely seems consistent with his personality and persona.
It's like, so what's my BOA
ride that
budget?
Now, this is the first time Bowie is in America, and the most important thing that happens is he makes a lot of important contacts, including with 2 of his musical idols, Lou Reed of the Velvet Underground and Iggy Pop from the Stooges. Based on these meetups, he concludes that all American musicians are junkies. But seriously, it's fascinating to think about Bowie being starstruck by these 2, who happen to be at a real low point, both of them, in their artistic careers and in regards to drugs. The Stooges can't sell any records, but Bowie loves the Stooges. He loves their sound.
Funny.
And Lou Reed had just quit the Velvet Underground and is about to embark on this uncertain solo career. And Bowie's one of those guys who got one of those early VU and Nico records and just loved it and has been idolizing New York and Lou Reed since then. But at this point, Iggy and Lou are both heroin addicts. The meetings, like, they're in the power position over Bowie. Bowie's like, yo, we should work together sometime. They're like, yo, all right, whatever, maybe. Later, it's going to be reversed, as you're going to see.
Yeah. I've got this ostrich tuning I'm working on if you could just get lost.
Like, you look pretty skinny. You down with the horse? You ride the horse there, buddy?
But out of these meetings, Bowie, the consummate observer, and some might even say culture vulture, starts thinking about the idea of a fallen rock star. He also meets a guy on the touring circuit around this time called Vince Taylor. Vince Taylor is a sort of also ran American rock and roller Elvis Presley type from the same era as Elvis, whose career falls apart in the 60s because of drugs and mental health decline, to the point where he became convinced he was some kind of messianic figure. Anyway, I'd never heard of him before this week, but he was a bigger hit in Europe. And Bowie has said multiple times that Ziggy Stardust, the character, is at least partially based on this guy Vince Taylor's life.
So the cult leader and 2 heroin addicts. All right, got it. Right.
Do you go out to lunch on that? Are you like, hey, you know that album Ziggy Stardust about the, it's a cautionary tale of rock and roll excess leading to, your life falling apart? That's me. You wrote that about me. Yeah.
Now, interestingly as well, Ziggy is a direct nod to Iggy Pop.
Okay, right.
Changed one letter. Bowie absolutely loved the Stooges' first 2 records, including Funhouse, which we covered on our show back on episode 113. And this was at a time when they were just not very widely known. And I should point out that a couple years later, he ends up helping to get them a new contract, brings them to London, and co-produces Raw Power, and then later produced Iggy's solo albums, The Idiot and Lust for Life. the latter of which we covered back on episode 12, if you can believe it.
Damn.
12? That was Lust for Life?
Yes. As to Lou Reed, after his first solo record floundered, he remembered meeting Bowie that one time, and Bowie's offer to work together. And by that point, Bowie was a huge star, so he calls him up, and Bowie produces Transformer, Reed's biggest solo hit, which includes songs like Perfect Day and Walk on the Wild Side. And as I mentioned in last week's By the Numbers, all 4 of the records I just mentioned are on the 1001 list.
I mean, Transformer is just
Nice.
a timeless smash record.
Yeah. I don't like Lou Reed, and that's a fucking great record. I have an aversion to Lou Reed as a person, and I don't really respect him as a musician all that much, but that's a great fucking album, I gotta say.
So, in any case, back to Ziggy Stardust. So, last thing I want to say about the references that he's making. Stardust is debatably a reference to 2 things. One is something called the legendary Stardust Cowboy. Have you guys heard of this guy? He's a Texas-born outsider artist, think Daniel Johnston-esque country
Definitely
singer.
not. No, definitely listening.
He's credited with starting the Psychobilly movement. Does that help?
Oh, God.
Psychobilly sounds a little more familiar. We're getting closer. For sure, getting closer.
I'm going to put one of his songs on the playlist, and I really want you guys to listen to it because it's fucking insane. But anyway,
All right.
it's either that or a combination of that, and Stardust is also possibly a nod to the American songbook standard Stardust by our favorite Tin Pan Alley songwriter. That's right, Hoagie Carmichael.
Oh, there we go.
Hoagie.
And I can't not mention one last thing that strongly influences this record, this band, this stage show, this whole aesthetic. It's Stanley Kubrick and his 1971 film, A Clockwork Orange. So while Space Odyssey, Kubrick's previous film, was clearly an influence on Space Oddity, Kubrick's next movie about a near-future British dystopia where teenage street gangs dressed in the height of fashion roam the streets causing all kinds of criminal havoc, then listen to Beethoven back home, was a big inspiration for the Spiders from Mars. They even considered calling themselves the Droogs, which means friend in the Russian hybrid language of the book and movie.
Wow.
So is the whole
Deep cut.
only ingesting peppers and milk also, there's also a throwback
That's a good
to
question. Yeah, the old Moloko
Something.
Plus.
Yeah, there you
I'm a
go.
huge Clockwork Orange fan, and I did notice, of course, that connection in high school. And in Suffragette City, he makes a couple direct Clockwork Orange references, but definitely influenced by Kubrick. Really pretty wild movie if you haven't seen it. I'm not sure I could fully recommend it. Don't put it on when the kids are there, certainly.
Yeah, right.
Totally inappropriate.
For everybody, probably. So each person in this band, of course, gets a persona. There's Ziggy, of course. The other 2 guys are called Weird and Gilly. Don't know what those mean.
He got lazy.
And then Mick Ronson gets to just keep his own name for some reason.
Mick's just like, I'm not doing this, man. No, I'm sorry. I'll write the horn parts, I write the orchestra parts, but I'm not fucking doing the nickname thing.
Well, everyone already calls him Rano, so I guess that's sort of an alter ego.
Right.
But Tony Visconti leaves the band at this point over some kind of dispute over the new management. And also because he has some new exciting career opportunities. One, I already mentioned this, he gets offered a spot in the band, T-Rex, who at that moment are climbing the charts much faster than Bowie. This is the so-called T-Rextasy period in the UK. And then he also goes on to produce Electric Warrior and a few others with them. Later, Electric Warrior we also covered on the show. He also produces the first 2 albums by Adam's Prague heroes, Gentle Giant.
Yes! Nice.
Gentle Giant aren't coming up enough on the show.
They're not.
I get a feeling
That's-
they're gonna continue to not come up.
I don't think they're on the list.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, he produces their first 2 albums. So Visconti does end up being a lifelong friend of Bowie, though, and ends up producing or co-producing multiple other Bowie records, touring with him on and off, and he even co-produces that final album, Black Star, but he is not on this album, Ziggy Stardust, at all. So let's run through the band that is on this album. We've already mentioned their names. It's Trevor Bolder on bass, Woody Woodmansey. Sorry, that name just cracks me up. Woody Woodmansey on drums, Mick Ronson, a.k.a. Rano, on guitar and the keyboard parts and the string arrangements. Although Bowie does get a string credit as well. I'm not 100% sure about that because everything I heard in interviews said that Rano did all the string arrangements. Now, Bowie is playing acoustic guitar, mostly, if not all, a 12-string, apparently a really cheap one as well, which might account for why it was so out of tune. And he's singing, of course, and he's playing sax. And lastly, the most important member of the band, Bowie's mullet.
He was rocking a serious mullet, though.
Serious mullet.
That was fucking and he dyed it
Space
red.
mullet.
It's like a
space mullet.
red ginger mullet. Yeah.
Space mullet, yes.
He might have been the first famous person to have a mullet, too. This might have been the original mullet. I'm not sure, but...
Yeah, it's funny. If that is the case, that the mullet was then taken on by people who would have kicked the shit out of the androgynous Faye Bowie walking down the street of their town.
So anyway, it's actually Angie. She's a tour manager. She's a stylist. She's a den mother to the boys. And remember, there's really not much money yet. The whole thing is conceived, the stage show that is, as part kabuki theater, part spaceman, part street gang, a la Clockwork Orange, and part androgynous sex symbol. So now... we are primed to record the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars.
One quick question before we jump into this. Is the Rolling Stones song Angie about this woman, Angie, that was David Bowie's wife that you're talking about?
I want to say it was somebody that dated both Mick and Keith, and I can't think of what her name is, but she's sort of a famous girlfriend of that group.
Okay.
Angie Bowie ended up, I don't know all the ways she ended up, but she definitely got involved in the New York Andy Warhol factory scene and kind of was more wrapped up in that side of the things. She left London, I think, after too long.
You know what? I actually just pulled this up really quickly. So there was speculation that the song Angie was written about David Bowie's first wife, Angela, the actress Angie Dickinson, but it came out later that it was about Mick Jagger's daughter, who he named Dandelion Angela, which is a fucking terrible name. What the fuck were you thinking, Mick? God damn.
Yeah, I don't think he was thinking that. That's brutal.
Yeah, that's terrible. I see why she goes by Angie.
Dandelion? Dandelion.
Well, that's one of their songs as well. That's a Rolling Stones song from the not-so-great period where they were trying to do their own psychedelic Sgt. Pepper's, I think.
Dandelion Angela?
I don't know, man. I must have been thinking of a different woman. I can't remember who I'm thinking of. There was some famous girlfriend that I think dated both of them. Anyway, like I've told you in this story, Bowie is certainly not an overnight success. This is the 5th album for Bowie. And after many false starts, it is the album that rockets him to superstardom. The previous record, Hunky Dory, made with a very similar band, really right before they recorded this. The single Changes off of that was a modest hit at the time. It's now considered a classic of Bowie. But those songs are much more acoustic, piano-driven. They had Rick Wakeman in the band, so there was a lot more piano flourishes, let's say. And the band quickly realized after recording it that they weren't really suitable to a rock and roll live show. So that's one of the reasons they immediately went back into the studio to record more songs, which became this.
I'm a little surprised that Hunky Dory wasn't more successful because I fucking love that album. That is one of my top David Bowie albums. I just think that one personally, I maybe I came to that at the right time in my life, but I've always really, really loved that album.
I love it too. It is also on the 1001 list, and I think they really deserve to be thought of as a pair. It almost reminds me of Working Man's Dead and American Beauty or something like that. They were recorded so close together. They do have a slightly different approach to the thing in the way that I just said, but I think those are some of his best songs as well.
They also have both of like this sort of black and white recolored cover aesthetic as well.
Yeah.
Like it seems like Bowie's really he's in a space and a time there.
But I think what happened here, right, is that they were just pulling together this idea for a live show, these costumes, these personalities, this alien rock star thing, and they knew that wouldn't be the set of songs that would get them where they wanted to go with the audience. And they were right.
So they had the image put together and then looked at the material and says, this material does not work with this image. Let's go right to the image.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, that's cool.
I got to say, if you're coming out with the image, the Ziggy Stardust image, and then playing Oh You Pretty Things or something else off of Hunky Dory, I could see that being a little like, oh, this is a little incongruous. You know, I can't exactly imagine Song for Bob Dylan working with like the overall aesthetic that they had.
The cape, the giant cape, yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple rockers. Yeah, Queen Bitch certainly would have been in their live show around this time and things like that. But yeah, for the most part, it's a much more introspective acoustic record. I mean, Life on Mars, freaking banger, clearly.
Clearly.
You could have that take the place of a Rock and Roll Suicide or a 5 Years in terms of where it would fit into a live set. But you're right, there's just not enough to sustain an electric guitar-based band in there.
Yeah.
Okay. The music buying public, I should point out, at this point is starting to see him as a chameleon, someone whose style is constantly changing. So even though he's not a star yet, he's kind of a known quantity. Space Oddity got him to top of the pops, and in his mind, he's so concerned because it's been a while since Space Oddity was a hit. It was his last charting hit that he is starting to be thought of as a one-hit wonder, and maybe that Space Oddity is almost a novelty song, right? But the point is, like, some people in the hip community have been following his career. He is changing it up almost album over album, and his full embrace of the character of Ziggy Stardust as a concept show, at the very least, cements that image of him forever. So that brings us to our favorite segment on the show. It's the making of Ziggy Stardust by the numbers.
Yeah, let's do it.
And Rob, kudos to you, because by the numbers is the hardest segment to put together on the show. And you had to do 2 of them for this album, so I congratulate you on that one.
Well done, sir.
Well, heads up, guys. We have touched on a couple of these, but hopefully they'll still be surprising, or you can pretend. First number I want to tell you about is number 1. Bowie loved the idea of getting the song in a take or 2 max, but even more insane was he also transferred that approach to vocals. According to co-producer Ken Scott, 95% of what we're hearing vocally are first takes. And yes, that includes harmonies.
Dude, that's crazy.
That's nuts.
Wow.
That is kind of nuts, yeah.
I think it also shows you come in with a very solid vision to be able to knock that out. You're not searching for notes. You know exactly what you are supposed to be singing, and kind of in a way that maybe even is dickish to the rest of the band. Like, if he's only given the rest of the band 1 or 2 takes, he's been practicing this shit on his own for a long time.
You know, man, that's a great point. Like, he's been at home on his, out-of-tune 12-string or his fucking harp, just fucking riffing these over and over and over. Like, he's powering through some of these songs, like, vocally.
Yeah.
He only gets the harps that didn't pass QA, though. That's gets him at a discount.
That's a good, yes.
Good callback, Rob.
B-list harps.
Next number is 1. It was recorded at Trident Studios with Ken Scott helping Bowie produce it, and as Tom alluded to, Ken Scott is a storied engineer, and number 1 refers to the fact that his first ever session as an engineer was for A Hard Day's Night.
Ah, nice.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty damn
He then
cool.
went on to co-produce or produce Bowie, Elton John, Beatles solo work. This is a guy.
Yeah. I think he worked with, like, Pink Floyd. Like, he was an engineer par excellence. Like,
The thing is, he worked, because here's what sometimes we don't realize, right, is you work at the studio. I mean, we know it from the studios we go to. He worked at Abbey Road. So he doesn't really get to choose who he works with exactly. He's just there on the day or he's not. And then he worked at Trident Studios. And those are the 2 biggest studios where all the classic rock records were made in London.
yeah.
Next number is 8,000. This record was released in November of 1972 and sold 8,000 copies in the UK in its first week. Considered a huge success at the time, and it charted in the top 10 right away.
Nice.
And now I direct your attention to 7.5 million, as in copies sold worldwide. But that only makes it Bowie's second best-selling album after
Oh, is it Let's Dance?
Let's Dance, which has sold closer
Nice.
to 11 million.
Damn.
That was so big in the 80s.
He was so big, and that's such a hard left turn from everything else he was doing.
Tom, do you remember that time in the Chop when
God
you
damn it.
wanted to kill people over that count-in for
Modern Love.
Modern Love?
I believe I told John that if you can't understand what the counting is, you should probably just stop playing music. And at the time, I was wrong. Clearly, it was in 6, and I was counting in 4, and I was just wrong.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's a little funky because the count-in is in 6, but then when it hits, the song's in 4/4.
Yeah,
So it is a little tricky.
it is. I was being an asshole. Clearly, I was wrong. And for those of you who have not listened to the podcast before, but storied listeners will know, when I am wrong, that is when I'm the biggest asshole.
I always say I learned a huge lesson about humanity then, Tom, because Tom, for listeners who don't know, had just started playing the drums. He was a bass player for a long time. He was way better at bass, but in this situation, we needed him to play drums. He did an admirable job, but he didn't really have much innate skill to stand on. And yet, you were able to transfer your musical ego from bass playing over to the drums nonetheless.
Yes, I can be a dick about even things I'm really shitty at, Rob. Yes, thank you. It is a skill. It's a learned trait.
Well, it's a confidence. It's confidence.
And, yeah. And the last number is 201. That's the number of weeks in a row that we've produced an episode of 1001 Album Complaints, and you, dear listeners, have listened. It's been almost 4 years now, and a hell of a ride. So if you're listening to the sound of my voice, thank you. And if you're new to the show, I'm excited for you to dive into that back catalog or discover the amazing community of complainers we've got going on over on our absolutely free Patreon feed. Every week there's a lively discussion of the record we're covering, so sign up today and get in there.
You know, Rob, I can't think of a lot of things that I've done for 201 weeks in a row that I'm not ashamed of.
Well said.
Yeah.
Back to the recording sessions, though. Everyone around the record says Bowie was extremely focused, decisive during the session. We've already been talking about this. He knew exactly what he wanted. He'd hum guitar solos to Rano for him to play, and for the band takes, to help them get through these live takes for the most part. So most of what we're hearing is live takes. I think the piano was overdubbed, and of course, the strings were overdubbed. But the band talks, again, how they'd hear a song one time, they'd get one run through, maybe two to learn or arrange it, and then they'd be playing. So it's
pretty badass.
A different way to do things. Again, I don't think they're less for it. We've talked about other records where that approach really feels like the songs and the arrangements and the productions are suffering for it.
Right.
These guys must have just really been crack players. I mean, I think they were just all playing in bands for their whole life, and they, of course, had been playing with David Bowie for a minute and together for a minute. And in fact, we talked about how Visconti left, and Mick Ronson is the one that got Trevor Bolder because they grew up together and were in bands together. So they were old buddies. They kind of knew each other. So they're doing a great job in a tough situation.
Totally.
We touched on it as well, but Ken Scott talked about very purposely using the acoustic guitar. It's a 12-string that Bowie was very fond of playing, and he's using it almost like hi-hats in the mix. There's not a lot of cymbal work on this record, and that's very purposeful.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So the 12-string kind of keeps the time and drives a lot of the arrangements forward in the place that maybe a hi-hat often would do that.
It's kind of high and tinny, and in this case, out of tune.
And
your hi-hats can't go out of tune, right?
Just a couple other gear things that I thought were interesting. So Mick Ronson, the guitar player, used the black Les Paul that he stripped all the paint off of because he thought it gave it more resonance. And I like that anecdote because it's such an experimental time for sound. People are just trying stuff. Maybe that'll do it. Just put paint thinner on it.
Just hold a banana while you play. Yeah. What? Yeah, it's going to do something to the electrical signal.
So he has like one of the old like Black Beauty. Is it like the triple? Yeah, it's like the triple humbucker. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But if you watch the videos, it looks like it's wood grain. It's because he stripped it off with turpentine or something.
That is also such a fucking guitar player. No. It helps with my sustain, or no, it doesn't. Like, close your eyes. You cannot tell at all.
Absolutely, nobody knows. Nobody knows what the fuck it's gonna do, and they decide to take their guitar apart and dip it in turpentine.
Look, it's gonna look better when Bowie is filleting it on stage. So another thing Rano did is he's known for playing through what's called a cocked wah-wah pedal, which is to say the wah-wah pedal is engaged, but it's just sitting in a fixed position for the duration of the song, which you adjust based on the song's tone that you want. I had never heard of that. That sounds fairly obvious, but it's kind of cool.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a cool effect for sure. You get real like nasally, snarly tones.
And I don't want to leave the other guys out. The bassist Trevor Bolder is playing on flat wound strings, and I think you can definitely hear some of that slinkiness from the flat wounds. It's kind of, they're typically more associated with jazz. I think you're getting a very specific tone out of them. I don't know. What do you think of, Tom?
Well, that also was like James Jamerson famously played with flat wounds, on that kind of Motown sound.
Yeah.
And, there's a little less roundness to it, but this is also the days of passive pickups, just the, magnetic coils, like copper wire around a magnet. And that's how they're getting sound capture. So there's not that modern what most people associate with like 80s metal sound of like super round poppy bass going on. And so I don't think it mattered all that much. A lot of people, it's just like a fingertip preference, whether or not you want it to be like you're grating your fingers against the file, or whether or not as your flat wounds get a little worn out and they get a little separation and they're grating it against tiny razor blades. It's, it's one of the two.
Pick your poison.
Yeah.
And last but not least, the drummer Woody Woodmansey apparently hated the drum sound from the previous record, Hunky Dory, and we'd often complain about saying it sounded like cornflakes packets and potato chip bags. So as a classic inter-band boosh, the first day of the sessions, the rest of the band got in early, and where the drum kit was supposed to be, they brought in cornflakes and potato chips and mic'd them up.
Nice.
That's a great use of time. I'm sure Bowie loved that.
Yeah, what track can we hear that on?
Just nice to remember, since it's not going to last very long, that they're actually a happy band that's been kind of on the road dogging it, sleeping in sleeping
Right.
bags, traveling in a van, that kind of stuff. That's all about to change very shortly.
They're still friends. Yeah.
The concept, as we've alluded to, is loose, if anything. It was applied retroactively, and the songs were sequenced in a way that sort of makes it a story about Earth getting the news that it's done for, about Ziggy, the Starman, coming to save everyone, and about the vapidity of being a rock and roll savior, leading to his eventual death on stage at the end of Rock and Roll Suicide. So I wanted to mention, too, and one of you guys brought it up, and I think this is relevant, skipping back in time just a bit, but Starman, the lead single that came out before the album, it charted. Bowie went on Top of the Pops to promote it. And right around that time, he also smartly gives an interview in Melody Maker, a big music press in the UK, and comes out as gay. That gets a lot of press off of that. And what I heard in some documentaries and some interviews is just a slew of young British musicians talking about seeing Bowie play Starman on Top of the Pops. They're all glammed out, long hair, rainbow boots. Bowie and Rano are like hanging on each other's shoulders, being very... honestly nothing by today's standards, but apparently at the time it was completely revolutionary, and that definitely was the introduction of Bowie to a generation of kids in the UK.
Wow.
I find it a little odd that he's like, yep, I'm gay. This is my wife, Angie. Like, how did that go?
Yeah, good point.
It's interesting because Bowie has never wanted to be pinned down about sexuality. He has alternately called himself straight, gay, and bisexual in interviews throughout time. I think the only reasonable conclusion is that he is bisexual or even pansexual and pretty much open to anything at any time. Speaking of which, they then go to America on a huge tour, and debauchery, drugs. Every single person wants to have sex with David Bowie of all genders, in the limo, in the bathroom, backstage, whatever. It's everything he ever dreamed of. Except it also breaks his brain. Perhaps unsurprisingly.
Yeah. What you want is in the limo, Rob, Fucking fame. I'll do it to you.
Right, exactly. And yeah, this is really going to kick off his Cokey Coke fame monster period that leads up to our Station to Station episode. So you can reference that after this one if you haven't listened to it in a while, because it kind of continues this story. But I wanted to mention, too, that we didn't touch on it, but Bowie's always had this love of acting as a sidebar. He acted in some small movie roles before this, and we know that he had bigger acting roles later, including Labyrinth and other things. So he thinks of himself a little bit like a method actor, and he throws himself into this character and quickly begins to get to a dark place, doubting his own sanity. People say that fame engulfs him, and his ego just keeps getting fed, and it changes him, at least for a time.
We've talked about this with performances before, but I think we can all kind of agree that if you go all in on a performance, you might fail, but you might be great. If you go halfway in on a performance, you will fail.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that you can be compelling halfway in. And so I can see it. He's got to go all in.
Especially a character like that. Like it would come off, you could tell if he wasn't in it, if he was faking it. You know what I mean? Just with the bombast of that character. I feel like you could see it's inauthentic if it was just him just trying to get a check.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing because he finally gets what he wants and then immediately realizes it's tainted. for a variety of reasons. They tour for 18 months. It's a hugely popular tour. The record is selling like crazy. They make a concert movie also called Ziggy Stardust and released on Spotify as well. And more recently, there's a widely bootlegged, or what was a widely bootlegged Santa Monica show from this tour was released on Spotify. And in my opinion, it's a better, cooler representation of the band from that tour. So if you want something to listen to, I'd recommend that one, not the Ziggy Stardust motion picture. But in classic Bowie fashion, he quickly realizes that if he does not act fast, Ziggy will define his entire career.
Yo, smart, man.
So, on the last night of their tour in London, he announces on stage to both his bandmates and the audience simultaneously that this is the last show they will ever do.
Oh,
He tells the band for the first time they're hearing that.
Yeah, apparently Rano knew, but the other two guys are hearing it on stage for the first time.
That's a dick move.
that's rough. Yeah.
Now, when he says they, does he mean Ziggy and the Spiders, or does he mean,
It doesn't sound like Bowie was a great communicator. I think after that, he kind of disappeared. No one could get a hold of him. It's unclear what he meant. He might have only been referring to the character of Ziggy Stardust. He might have been totally open to working with these guys. He ends up working with Mick Ronson for a couple more albums. I believe Trevor Bolder also is on at least the next album. But Woody Woodmansey gets fired right around this time because he's so pissed at Bowie for announcing this thing on stage. So it's not super clear what he meant, if he was calling it into the band generally or just Ziggy Stardust. But like I said, Trevor Bolden went on, play on 2 more Bowie records, then he joins Uriah Heep. Rano and Bowie stay close for a while. He actually helps out with Transformer. He's on Transformer as well. And I think he might even get a co-producer credit or some co-writing credits on that. He ends up sadly dying of liver cancer at age 46.
Oh, man.
Damn.
isn't that also what killed Bowie?
Jeez.
I think he might have died of pancreatic cancer.
So Bowie obviously would continue to evolve and do lots of other work, as we know from his large number of entries on the list. Shortly after this, for instance, he attempted to create a musical of the book 1984, but he couldn't get the rights from George Orwell's estate. So that album played some leftovers from these sessions, including the song Rebel Rebel, and became Diamond Dogs.
I'm, by the way, just picturing a hilarious, upbeat Broadway rendition of 1984 with all the flashes of Broadway. Big Brother is watching.
The proles and
Well, some of those songs are on Diamond Dogs. There is a song called 1984 on Diamond Dogs.
Bowie did also die of liver cancer, so there was something in that UK cocaine or that Ziggy Stardust American tour.
Yeah, let's not bear. They were also raging alcoholics as well.
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's one of the things that really stood out to me in Moon Age Daydream is Bowie is holding a glass of alcohol, liquor, in fucking every shot. I'm talking interviews, live video, music videos on stage. He never seems drunk, but he is drinking and has a glass of liquor in every shot.
Yeah, and you know what? Frankly, the man lived until his late 60s.
Yeah.
And did whatever the fuck he wanted his entire life.
69 raging hard years. Yeah.
69 raging, probably if we're going to add up peak years, trade life with somebody, Bowie seems like a pretty good one to trade with. Feel like I just fucking rocked it. I released an album and then I died. And that album is also essential. That's pretty damn good.
He definitely appeared to go pretty hard, yes.
I can't wait till we eventually talk about Black Star, because that's the most baller move any artist has ever pulled off. It's an album about his death, released on his birthday, and then he promptly dies.
No way.
Yeah, and it's fucking good. It's
Dude,
actually
that's
good.
crazy.
And it's really good. Anyway, as you know, we'll get to that eventually. But also, Bowie became known for helping other musicians that he admired, helping them out through production or songwriting, like with Iggy Pop or Lou Reed, or even when he heard that a band he happened to really like was breaking up, he encouraged them to keep at it. And to do so, he gave them a song of his to record. The band was Mott the Hoople, and All the Young Dudes became their biggest charting hit at number 3 in the UK.
No way.
Wow. Somebody liked Mott the Hoople before All the Young Dudes.
And by the way, it sounds like such a Bowie song.
It totally sounds like Bowie.
It does. Even the vocals sound like you listen to it and you're like, oh, that's a Bowie B-side.
Yeah, he's doing an impression, basically.
Yeah, right.
By the way, they turned down Suffragette City.
Oh.
Well,
Bowie
all right.
was like, why don't you take one of these jams?
They're like, our name's Mott the Hoople. We make bad choices. All right.
Starting with our band name. So look, the Spiders, it does kind of feel like they got the shaft. They were on top of the world, and then the bottom dropped out. Bowie gets sole writing credit for all these songs. So the band's only getting paid per show or per session. And so, but Bowie's also one of those guys that never stays in one place too long. It's kind of his thing, right? And so he goes on. The next record is called Aladdin Sane. It's technically a different character. This is the iconic lightning bolt image. It's more jaded rock star energy, definitely not as good. And eventually, of course, he releases a couple more albums. He descends into rock star cocaine addiction and goes to LA to record Station to Station, which we covered back on episode 41. Go check that out for that story. And then he moves to Berlin to dry out and do a trilogy of albums we'll get to some other time. Shall we dive into the songs on side 2, gents?
Yes, sir.
Let's do this thing.
First up, to start the album off with a bang, it's Lady.
Do you realize how many times the word star appears in these tracks in terms of the title? There is Starman, Lady Stardust, Star, and then Ziggy Stardust. Just a little fun thing I noticed there.
I mean, he definitely associates himself with stardom in that way, doesn't he?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That hurt me from appreciating this song, and I had initially had Star as the side 2 low point. But Phil requested we discuss this one. I actually think this is a better song than I had previously given it credit for. But I think the fact that it has not only Star, but Stardust in the title was holding me back from really giving it a strong listen. That, plus it's not really a rock song.
It's definitely not really a rock song. I kind of like how it sort of balances out with the first side. Like it's sort of... The first side, 5 years ramp up, is significantly more effective than this. Like, let's be clear, right? But it has the same, like it builds slowly with that crunky piano.
Yeah.
I also, and I alluded to this in the other episode, I like the way that both Starman and Lady Stardust start with this, like, 4 chord with the sharp note in it, right? Like, so in this case, it's like...
Oh, yeah.
I won't go too deep into it, but... Rob, you alluded to the fact that Starman had been written later, like, because there wasn't a hit. Mm-hmm. I would now hypothesize that he just slapped a cape on for Starman to take it up. He basically just took the same intro. It has its same A to E with this weird out note. And it is a bit of an aside from the song. Like, it doesn't really fit into the song harmonic.
That piano intro? Yeah, totally.
Like, it's like to get your attention.
I would say this feels like it could have fit better on Hunky Dory. If you're sort of wondering what the vibe of Hunky Dory is like, this would be the vibe of it. I do think the piano playing is really good, though, and I think the singing is really good, too.
Oh, yeah. Super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I have this as not a high point on the second side of the album, but honestly, my note is still better than 95% of all songs ever written. That's probably a pretty good way to think about it, because, like, the rest of this album is pretty stacked, and this song just doesn't quite hold a candle, but it's almost not its fault. It's like being a pretty good-looking girl who's friends with supermodels or something like that. You're like, well, I'm the ugly one of the group. You're like, yeah, but you're hanging out with supermodels. You're still amazing. Or like when the rest of you guys hang out with me and you feel...
Of course.
That's exactly what I was thinking,
Yeah.
man. I was like, why is Tom being so humble? No, I mean, Adam, you talked about this too. Like, this wasn't like a chronological story, right? I came to this much later with this imagined version of Ziggy Stardust. So, like, I see this as like a response to Starman. There's a character on the first side who's longing for the Starman to come down. And then here he gets Lady Stardust, who's this androgynous freak who he, like, sees at a rock show, who, like, inevitably wins him over. But that's not really, that's my perception.
It's not the savior that he wanted, but the savior he needed.
Yeah, definitely the one he got.
But can we just say, I do think the best lyricists leave a lot of room. One approach to being a really good lyricist is to leave a lot of room for interpretation. And for as much silly, ridiculous stuff that I don't even understand what the heck he's talking about that Bowie gets off, I do think he has a way with words. I smiled sadly for a love I could not obey. It's poetic. It's maudlin, but it's poetic.
Yeah.
He says something about to watch this creature fare. Very, very English, dude. Like, you're channeling Shakespeare there. But yeah, I mean, I thought he got off a couple decent lines here. And I actually like the chord movements too. I'm not sure if this is actually modulating but the chords are not your straight ahead 1-4-5s by any means. So this song at least kept me interested.
He will often choose discordant chords that you're like, oh, that kind of doesn't work. And then by the end of the song, you're like, oh, no, that works. All right. Way to go. Way to bring me around to it.
This is definitely Rick Wakeman again, right?
I don't think it is.
Really?
I think Rick Wakeman only plays the harpsichord on It Ain't Easy. And that's it.
And maybe that was a holdover from the previous sessions. Maybe that's why. No, I think this is Rano.
Oh, yeah. It's good. It has some, I was going to say, it sort of sounds like Rick Wakeman phoning it in, right? It has some like Wakeman-esque, like, but like, it sort of sits back.
What a great compliment for any piano player ever. You sound like Rick Wakeman mailing it in. Yeah, man. All right. Or phoning it in rather.
Or like you sound like Rick Wakeman taught one of his friends, like, here's a little trick. You just do this. And then that's
just do it at a dinner party. Everyone will be.
Well, it's like if you listen to the piano playing on the song Life on Mars, it's like acrobatic.
Agreed. Yes.
You know what I mean? I don't think Rano could handle that.
No. Yeah.
I just want to say, too, we've kind of said it before, but you have to understand with the poetic and the Shakespeare and the maudlin, he's coming from a baseline of one-man show, theater, dinner theater, cabaret style. And that is a line that kind of, I think, flows through everything else he does. He likes this overly dramatic approach to the thing. So even when he's changing styles, to me, there's always an element of that in there. Of that kind of camp.
You're telling me the guy who's super into costumes and taking on personas is a fan of the dramatic? Yes.
I'm just saying, like, you kind of have to accept that about him. And, of course, like any artist that's done a million things, you have to accept that lots of them are terrible, and that's fine, too.
Yeah, but David Bowie has always been one of those people that is like an artist with a capital A.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't think of somebody like, let's put it this way, I don't think of even Mark Bolan as an artist with a capital A. Mark Bolan's like a musician. David Bowie's an artist, and I think that that's like a separation there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it because, of course, they were friends. They were rivals. T-Rex took off first. They clearly had some hits. And even before Mark Bolan died tragically young, people were already saying, yo, man, you're kind of just recycling the same old stuff again and again. It's like this glammed up 50s rock and roll. We've heard that. And Bowie, smartly, was constantly trying to turn the dial and move on. And that's why he persists much more.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the title track, sort of. It's called Ziggy Stardust.
Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly and the Spiders from Mars. He played it left hand, but made it too far.
It's time for the bass takeover.
Dude.
Oh my God, this bass line is so hot.
I was going to say, the bass is so freaking cool here. I'm glad you feel the same way. I think the bass and the electric guitar are both very coolly, selectively, melodically following the vocal, but I had never really dialed in on that bass part before this week. And it really gave me elements of that Beatles elevated arrangement style. There's just this like flowing melody and awareness of what the other players, given that this is probably a live take, right? There's a cool feature of this song that's pretty straightforward quarterly.
Yeah, he's picking up on the melody and continuing it through in a way that is just, it's just the star of the song. It honestly is objectively the most interesting thing that happens in the song, even with that because that guitar is also great. But it's basically as soon as that's done, it's just the bass show from then on out.
Well, what I was struck by, of course, you think of that riff, and that riff is literally one of the very first things I ever learned on guitar.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it memorable, it's pretty standard from a chord pattern perspective, but it's that rhythmic change they do in the center of the riff. Songs in 4, but right in the center of the riff, they give you a 3-3-2 feel, which adds up to 8, so it fits, but it's just like a chunking rhythm that gives you some variation within it.
Is that when they're walking down from the C to the B to the open A? Imagine a time when that was still available. as a musical motif, like a D to a C, walk it down to an A, and people were like, whoa.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it could also still come off stock if you didn't give it that little oomph in the arrangement.
Yeah, totally.
That's kind of my point there. I think it, to be honest, in my real opinion, I think you can still do whatever. You can still do most stock stuff, but you're going to have to elevate it somehow, some way, rhythmically or otherwise, to make me care.
Something else that's elevated about this song, right? They're very subtle. Is this has all these super cool guitar harmonies that show up for just like one line. Like Ziggy played guitar, triple guitar harmony in one ear, blah, and then it stops.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and then there's another time where like he plays some chromatic line and it's like the guitar, it's the bass, and at least two guitars stack up, but then all those other guitars will just disappear for the rest of the song. So they're like, oh, let's triple stack this one. Just that one.
For this flourish, yeah.
No, that's what I meant, is that I think that verse guitar deserves its spot next to that verse bass. And they're clearly listening to each other. And these are the two that had played together young, right? Mick Ronson recruited Trevor Bolden into the band after Visconti left because they were from the same hometown. They'd played in bands together. And so it just sounds to me like people who kind of know how to not run into each other and both be kind of getting their lines in and doing cool things together.
Absolutely.
Do you know it's another cool effect? It's just a fun recording effect. I love how he like double takes the first verse, you know, like a unison, and then it drops to just one voice for Ziggy really sang. You know, and he sings it all like Ziggy really sang. And he
I made
sings it
that
all
note.
ridiculous. But I also like the way it drops to a single voice and it creates like an intimacy on that one line.
Yeah. I could have used a little bit more double tracking of his vocals. And again, I understand it was a conscious choice, but when he doubles his vocals, I think it works
very
particularly
cool,
well. Yeah.
Actually, I have a complaint that his voice is mixed a little weird in the choruses, which is definitely double tracked. Maybe it's an octave or something. It always just sounded a little bizarre to me.
While the fly tries to break our bones, but just the fear like to guide us. So we bitched about his fans and should with crutches.
I took that as purposeful, as like an effect that they were trying to put on the voice. And so it never particularly bumped me. And maybe it's just because I've been listening to this song since before I started thinking about music in this way. And so it's just kind of always been like that.
That's fair.
I will say my favorite thing that I learned this week, I've always wondered. He said he was the Naz with God-given ass. Like, what the fuck does the Naz mean? And I found what it means. So apparently that was mod slang, which meant the best. And it came from an American comedian named Lord Buckley, who would do these comedy routines about the New Testament with like jive talking modern slang, and he would refer to Jesus Christ as the Naz because he was Jesus of Nazareth.
Wow.
And that's where the Naz became like the best.
When I was a kid, I definitely thought it was the Nast, and that's like in wake of like Bill and Ted, and like you know, I was like, oh, he's the Nast, you know,
It's the Nast.
he's like,
And then he follows it up with Leper Messiah. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Too. That'd be a great Bowie
Yeah.
tribute band.
Yeah.
That or God-given ass would both be.
Leper Messiah makes more sense with Tom's comment there about the source of Naz.
I was like connecting it to the rapper Nas, like Nas. Like, does that mean something? Yeah, it's got Kanye West on the cover. He's talking about Nas. David Bowie's a fucking time traveler.
Again, it's all tying out.
Him and Toth have just been hanging, dude.
All right, let's keep things rolling, boys. Next up is Suffragette City.
Oh, leave me alone, you know. Oh, Henry, get off the phone. I've got the state on my face. This mellow fat chick's just put my spine out of place. My school is insane. My work's down the drain. But she's a total blam blam. She said she had to squeeze it, but she wouldn't let you. Oh, don't lean on me, man, 'cause you can't afford the ticket. Back from Suffragette City. Oh, don't lean on me, man, 'cause you ain't got time to check it. You know my Suffragette City.
Dude, I just think this song is the epitome of cool. I love every line in it. This is probably one of the first songs from Bowie that really got me excited. And I just want to quote a couple lines from it. This mellow-thighed chick just put my spine out of place.
Great line. Great line. I wrote that one down too. Yeah.
Also, she's a total bam bam. I really like a lot. It's just...
Is this the greatest restart in rock and roll history? Like,
yeah.
It's like the leading into the wham bam thank you ma'am is amazing, and then you get that pick slide on the guitar right before it kicks in. I think it might be the best kick in rock and roll history.
And the wham bam thank you ma'am does sort of harken back a little bit to like the Little Richard wop bop a loo bop.
Absolutely.
Like it borrows from that drum fill sort of delivery.
No, it's a great point. I think there's a lot of Little Richard in here. I was going to note that they do some really nice, because it's pretty power chordy smash rock and roll song. But again, they get some really nice production details. At 2:23, the 16th note piano kicks in, where it's just been kind of playing rhythmically before. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And I just think they wring a lot out of it with a nuanced arrangement, even though it's pretty simple.
There's some cool moments in the horn arrangement where like I really can't tell if there's a synthesizer mixed in with the horn arrangement.
It's only synth.
It's only synth. See, again, that's fun. Like it felt to me like a horn arrangement with synths in there with it. So again, just like well executed.
Yeah, I had always thought it was horns as well, but yeah, it's only keyboard and it's all played by,
Dope.
again, Mick Ronson.
That was my comment. It's like, this is how you do synth right. It sounds additive. It's not cut through. It's just
owning
like,
it.
Sits with the rest of the instruments. I also think that like they wring so much intensity out of that super simple like dun 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 dun. You know, like that's so simple. That's like what every 14-year-old band does to like accentuate an ending. You're just like, let's just hit on the 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 1 2. But it works so well.
Once you figure it out, yeah, you're like, oh, yeah. I had never read the lyrics to this song. I've heard this song 1,000 times, and the only thing I ever took away was, hey, man. That's it. That's all. And like the little sing-along gang vocal, hey, man. And then I went and read the lyrics, and you're right, Rob. They're pretty hilarious.
Yeah, like what is he even... what is Suffragette City? What does any of this mean? No one knows, but it has the air of cool about it.
Yeah, you know what? I literally had not even thought about it until this very second. That Suffragette City is a total nonsensical thing to say. It doesn't mean anything. It's a city full of bossy women. I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I was trying to bring up Paul McCartney's Jet. I was trying to figure out how to bring this together, but I just don't know enough about that time in British history. But Tom, I'm glad you could get as cruel and sexist as possible, as quickly as possible.
hey, to be fair, bossy women turn me on. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Let's round it out, gents, with the last song on the record. It's called Rock and Roll. It's the similar format of song to 5 years. And both of them, I think, reach an emotional climax that is just really intense. And you mentioned this earlier, Tom. It's so short, but you wouldn't know it for the journey you go on. And this is a bit dark, but hopefully also uplifting. I have to believe that this is directly responsible for saving at least a handful of kids from committing suicide.
Damn.
It is so cathartic and positive and loving at the end. It's almost embarrassing to listen to in the way that your parents are embarrassing when you're 12 years old, you know?
We love you. You're wonderful. Like, yeah.
Exactly.
But no, it's a great message. You're not alone. You're wonderful.
Oh, yeah. As I'm now reading the lyrics, yeah.
Oh, this song's amazing.
I'd never heard this song before, so this was new to me. I did want to register a complaint with apparently the best song ever written here. So at 2:47, right? It's the big ending. Feels super anticlimactic because they do this chord progression that just kind of throws you off, and it stops, and then there's like an orchestral hit, and I was like, what happened? Rob, to your point, he hits his emotional climax, and if they just kept repeating that back and forth chord pattern, but instead they do this thing where it like jumps you out of time, but it's not long enough or repeated enough to make you feel comfortable. It's just kind of like jumps, done. That's my only complaint.
Songs that feel like they just relentlessly loop, and that the melody and the arrangement and the production is what's driving it forward. And it's like, how do you end it? Do you fade it out? Do you cut it off? 5 years ends with just the drum beat.
The stage show in mind, right?
I agree with you, Adam. It limps to the finish line in a way that doesn't do justice to the amazing emotional payoff that you get from the end of the song.
Yeah.
I saw some live videos of Bowie playing this week. It definitely seems to translate live, though. Like, it definitely seems like there's something about the arc of the song where, like, they know the tension it's building over that first minute and 20 seconds and what the last 2 minutes will deliver. And obviously, at that point, the audience is there to see it, right? So, like, they're excited for it, too.
You know, Chev breaks are snarling. You know what's going on here.
Yeah, right. What the hell does that mean?
But right when that line comes in, I think that's when the horns first come in. And those saxophones are snarling. They're like, and they got this like ripping paper sound to the bottom of it. It sounds like a speaker is just like imploded or something. Kind of like, honestly, amazing tone on that.
As someone who, and we're all like this, I assume, has listened to a lot of music on headphones while walking out in the city or in life, I always am reminded of lines that reference you walking home. And they always just like hit me hard when I'm doing that thing. So the day breaks instead, so you hurry home. Just really, I know it's just kind of a throwaway line, but it always kind of hits me. And I'm like, yep, time to go home.
This is the one that Sue Jorge version, I think, is the best of the songs that he did. I think his version of Rock and Roll Suicide is amazing. And I have put that on playlists that I will listen to again and again. It's almost cheating, though, because I do feel like this is such a well-constructed song that an emotive singer with an acoustic guitar can do almost a more powerful version of it because you focus in on the core of it, you know?
Well, and I think something that could pass by, or even has passed me by until this week in the Deep Listen, was how led by an acoustic guitar it already is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of pizzazz around it, but really these are all acoustic guitar songs.
Yeah, when I was looking at some of the credits, and they're like, oh yeah, David Bowie was playing a 12-string acoustic guitar on Suffragette City. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I couldn't hear that at all, but...
I couldn't hear.
The line I liked, I think it actually applied to 5 years. But again, I think they're kind of two sides of a coin in terms of how they work as songs and how they probably worked in the live show. But I heard Angie Bowie say that they felt like the audience was so worked up by the end of the show, they needed to come. They needed a big finish to give them release. And that's how they got to these songs.
Jeez. Wow. Yeah. It's a pretty good way to end a concert.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if the cleaning crew would agree with that one, but...
Well, yeah, right. Sorry. Yeah, it's
Guar or David Bowie? What's going on here? Okay, I think we've gabbed quite enough over the course of 2 episodes. Thanks for hanging in there. We now need to vote on whether this record really belongs in the records you must hear before you die, and I'm going to send that vote first to Tom.
Yeah, this is very easy. Yes, perfect length for an album, great songs. Not all of them are winners, but the winners are absolute smashes. And so you will not regret listening to this album.
Excelente. Adam, you're up next, buddy.
Yeah, so for somebody who had never listened to this was an interesting week. It didn't impact me nearly as much as it impacted you guys. Again, I think it has to do with when you encountered this and encountered David Bowie in your life. So I wasn't floored. This didn't do a ton for me, but I understand. I understand why it's a big deal. So while I wasn't a huge fan of this album, I do think you should listen to it. So I'm going to say yes to David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, Spiders from Mars. I think I got that title right-ish.
A begrudging, yeah, there's way more words in it than that, Adam.
All the pitchfork-wielding hipsters are slowly being like, okay, all right, but you're on notice there, buddy. All right.
Phil, what say you?
Yeah, this is also an easy yes for me. While there are a couple of clunkers on here, there are 7 or 8 just stone-cold aces. Many of them, at least in the way they're organized, in the way, I've come to know them, feel like they're telling a pseudo-chronological story. 3, it's a really wonderful 39, 40 minutes. Easy yes for me.
Excellent. Well, no surprise to anyone listening. It is an easy yes for me as well. And while I will admit it is certainly not a perfect album, I do think that it is just able to tap into a well of emotion that not a lot of stuff can. And I think it's a David Bowie ability. And in particular in this period, I think this is David Bowie's best period. I think this and Hunky Dory are his best records. And I'll just say personally that one of the reasons he's a hero to me is because he was the first person that really made me feel like weird was cool. And I was a weird, nerdy kid. And I was trying to figure it out. This is even before I met you guys. I didn't know where I fit in. So I felt it.
Yeah, we know, Rob. You don't need to say this seriously. We knew that.
Obviously. So anyway, so that's what it means to me. I think once you are able to, if you kind of can't get David Bowie, it might be, consider that it's something about touching a real vulnerable part of yourself. That's what it reminds me of. Maybe it's because I got him when I was a teenager, but I think that part is still accessible as time goes on. So I recommend it thoroughly. Definitely listen to it before you die. Mr. Bowie, thank you. You badass.
Rob, I want to reference one thing that you said there, which I think is a very salient point, and I did kind of run over you with some, peanut gallery comments there. But I think that contrasting somebody like Bowie with a group like Pink Floyd's perfection makes them almost inaccessible, and it almost takes out any emotional resonance that like an album like Dark Side of the Moon could have had. You get it on The Wall, but The Wall is much less of a perfect presentation. And I think that Bowie's imperfections let you see the humanity in him. Oddly enough, for a man who was trying to be an alien.
Sure.
But there's definitely a soul to this that I do think is very touching.
Excellent. Then we all agree, Adam.
We do.
All right.
Failing this album, just go listen to Fish's David Bowie, and you'll get the same.
We'll also take about 39 minutes.
Same vibe, right?
I can find you a 39-minute Bowie.
You know what the greatest part about the Fish song David Bowie is that the lyrics are David Bowie UB40, like UB40, and it was released when David Bowie was 40 years old.
All right, that's badass. Or just stupid. All right, anyway.
It's also stupid, but it is badass. Like,
How has Adam become the hater on our show all of a sudden? All right, listen. It's been 2 long episodes. We're about to round things out for the night. We have one thing left. We didn't vote on next week's episode. We need the Albinator, Tommy.
Oh, my goodness. I took David Bowie's advice and I drank 5 beers during the course of this episode. So let's see if I can get the Albinator out of the corner without getting a DUI on the way. All right, let's spin that bad boy and see if it spits out a selection for next week. Without any further ado, drum roll, please. We will be listening to... The album is Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols by the Sex Pistols.
Wow. More emotional resonance and subtlety and arrangement, I assume.
Yes.
Although I'm sure they take inspiration from Bowie.
On the plus side, though, guys, 12 songs, 24 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Ooh, all right. That's nice. Not too shabby.
Not be labored.
Can we extend that into 2 episodes?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it has been an amazing ride with you guys through now 201 episodes. Thank you, complainers here and abroad, for everything. For everyone here at 1001 Album Complaints, this is Rob.
This is Tom.
I'm Adam.
And I am Phil.
You're not a boosh.